You haven't spoken to them in weeks, maybe months. With the clearest, most rational part of your mind that this person was not good for you. You've said it out loud. You've written it down. You've explained it to a friend who nodded and agreed and said you deserve better. And yet, at 2 in the morning, in the silence where there's nothing left to distract you, they are still there. Not a memory you're choosing to visit. A presence that arrives without permission. You replay conversations that ended badly. You imagine ones that never happened. You find yourself rehearsing what you would say if you saw them again. Even though, if you're honest, that seeing them again would not go the way the rehearsal does. And what makes this so quietly devastating is not just that you think about them. It's that you think about them more now than you did when they were actually in your life. The distance hasn't created clarity. It's created an obsession you didn't ask for and can't seem to end. Today we're going to look at exactly why that happens. Not to give you permission to go back. Not to romanticize what was real. But to explain the precise neurological reason your mind keeps returning to the source of its own pain, and what that actually means about what happened to you and what it doesn't mean about who you are. Let's stay with the experience before we try to explain it. Because the specific texture of this is important. This isn't the same as missing someone good who left. That grief has a cleanliness to it, a sadness that moves, that softens over time, that doesn't require explanation. This is different. This has an edge of something that feels almost like craving. You don't just think about them. You think about specific moments, the good ones, usually. The times when everything felt right. The version of them that appeared sometimes and made you feel like all the difficulty was worth it. And you find yourself analyzing, endlessly. Why did they act the way they did? What did they mean by that particular thing they said? Was there a version of events where it could have gone differently? Your mind circles the same material again and again, as if the next pass will finally yield the answer that resolves everything. It doesn't, but the circling continues anyway. And what this does to your identity is significant. Because you are not someone who doesn't know better. You do know better. That's the part that makes this so hard to admit to people. You can articulate clearly what was wrong. You can describe the pattern, name the dynamic, explain what it cost you. And then, in the same conversation, confess that you checked their social media this morning. And the gap between those two things, between what you know and what you do, makes you feel like something is fundamentally inconsistent in you. Like you can't be trusted with your own recovery. Like part of you is quietly working against everything the rest of you is trying to build. That feeling of internal division is real. But its cause is not what you think it is. Here's the reframe that matters most before we get to the mechanism. You are not weak for thinking about them. You are not secretly in love with your own suffering. You are not someone who is broken in a way that means you'll always return to what hurts you. What you are is someone whose brain was altered by a specific kind of relational experience. Not metaphorically altered. Neurologically altered. The pattern of thinking you're caught in is not a character flaw. It is the predictable, documentable, neurobiological result of a particular kind of attachment, one that your brain processed not as a relationship but as a survival circuit. And survival circuits don't respond to logic. They respond to something else entirely. Understanding what that something else is, actually understanding it, not just intellectually, but in a way that changes how you relate to the thoughts when they arrive, that is what creates genuine movement. Let's go into the mechanism directly. The experience you're having has a name in psychology. It's called traumatic bonding. And to understand it, we need to start with dopamine, but not in the oversimplified way it's usually described. Dopamine is commonly called the pleasure chemical. But that's not quite accurate. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It doesn't fire when you receive something good. It fires when you expect something good might be coming. And this is the part that explains everything. It fires most powerfully when the reward is unpredictable. This has been demonstrated in controlled research across decades. When a reward arrives on a fixed, predictable schedule, the dopamine response is moderate and stable. The brain notes the pattern and begins to take it for granted. But when the reward is intermittent, sometimes it comes, sometimes it doesn't. You never quite know which. The dopamine response escalates dramatically. The brain becomes hypervigilant, more activated, more focused on the source of potential reward than on almost anything else. Now map this onto what your relationship actually was. If the person who hurt you was consistently cold, consistently dismissive, consistently unkind, your brain would have adapted to that, registered it as the baseline, and eventually the pain would have been clear enough to move away from. But that's not usually what happens in these relationships. What usually happens is alternation, warmth and withdrawal, closeness and distance. Moments where everything felt extraordinary, followed without predictable pattern by moments that were confusing, hurtful, or destabilizing. Your brain did not experience that as a bad relationship. Your brain experienced that as an intermittent reward system. And intermittent reward systems create the strongest, most durable neurological bonds that the human brain is capable of forming. This is the same mechanism that makes certain forms of gambling almost impossible to stop, not because every turn pays off, but because you never know which one will. The unpredictability is not the reason to leave. The unpredictability is the chain. There is a second mechanism running alongside this one. When the relationship ended, or when the good moments ended, or when the person withdrew, your brain registered an incomplete reward cycle. It was anticipating something that didn't arrive. And the brain has a very specific response to incomplete reward cycles. It doesn't close the loop, it keeps it open. It keeps generating the anticipatory state, the thinking, the rehearsing, the analyzing, because at a neurological level, the circuit is still waiting for the resolution that would allow it to close. This is called the Zeigarnik effect in psychology, the well-documented phenomenon where incomplete experiences occupy significantly more mental bandwidth than completed ones. Your mind is not haunting itself with this person because they were special. Your mind is running an incomplete program that it doesn't know how to end. Because the ending it was waiting for, the one where the warmth came back reliably, where the good version of them became permanent, where the cycle resolved, never happened. So what actually interrupts this? Not willpower. Not deciding to think about them less. Those approaches fail because they're trying to override a neurological process with a cognitive one. And the neurological process is running at a level where cognition doesn't have direct access. What works is a set of practices that work with the brain's actual mechanisms rather than against them. Here is the framework. The first step is completing the incomplete loop deliberately. The brain keeps the circuit open because it never received a satisfying ending. Your job is to provide one, not the ending you wished for. The real one. This is a writing practice, and its neurological purpose is very specific. It moves the incomplete experience from the brain's active processing systems, where it generates intrusive thoughts, into long-term memory storage, where it becomes a completed event rather than an unresolved one. Write the actual ending, not the imagined conversation where everything is understood and resolved. The real ending, what actually happened, what was actually said or not said. What was actually true about this person when you look at the full picture rather than the moments your dopamine system has been curating? Write it until there is nothing left to add. The brain's narrative processing systems, centered in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. Close open loops through story completion. Therapy works partly for this reason. Writing works for this reason. You are not journaling for catharsis. You are completing a neurological file that has been sitting open, consuming processing power, since the moment the relationship ended without resolution. A real-life example. Someone who cannot stop thinking about a person who repeatedly dismissed them sits down and writes the full story, not the highlight reel, but the complete account. The pattern of behavior. The specific moments that were actually hurtful, written out in detail rather than glossed over. By the end, the person they've been obsessing over looks significantly different from the person their dopamine system has been presenting to them. The loop begins to close. The second step is interrupting the rehearsal loop in real time. The analyzing, the replaying. The imagined conversations, these are not random. They are the brain's attempt to solve an unsolvable problem using the only tool it knows, more thinking. But the problem is not a thinking problem. No amount of analysis will produce the insight that makes the pain make sense in a way that resolves it. The practice here is recognition rather than suppression. When the loop begins, when you notice the mind moving toward the familiar material, name what is happening precisely. Not, I'm thinking about them again, which feeds the content of the loop. But my brain is running an incomplete reward circuit, which steps outside the content and identifies the mechanism. This sounds small. Neurologically, it is significant. Naming a mental process activates the prefrontal cortex and creates a brief but real interruption in the automatic activation of the limbic system, the part of the brain running the loop. You are not suppressing the thought. You are changing your relationship to it from inside the thought to outside it. And from outside it, you have a choice that doesn't exist from within. A real-life example. Lying awake at 2 a.m., the mind moving toward the familiar replay. Instead of following it, you say internally or aloud, if you're alone, this is the incomplete circuit running. Pause. Breathe. Then redirect to something in the present physical environment. The weight of the blanket. The temperature of the room. You are not solving the pain. You are declining to feed the mechanism that perpetuates it. The third step is dopamine reassignment. The brain's reward system attached to this person. It will not simply detach through time and distance alone, because time and distance without replacement leave the circuit intact, just dormant, ready to reactivate with any relevant trigger. What the brain requires is new data. New sources of the anticipatory activation it has been getting from thinking about this person. This is not about distraction. Distraction is temporary, and the circuit returns when the distraction ends. This is about consciously, deliberately introducing new reward cycles that the brain can begin to build circuitry around, new learning, new creative investment, new relational experiences, even small ones, that generate genuine anticipation rather than manufactured busyness. The neuroscience here is straightforward. The dopamine system is not fixed to a specific object. It is a general anticipation system that can be redirected through new goal-oriented behavior. What you are doing is giving the system a new project, not to replace what you lost, but to give the part of your brain that has been oriented toward one source of activation somewhere new to go. A real-life example. Someone rebuilding after a relationship that dominated their mental space begins one small new project, not to fill time but to generate genuine curiosity, a language, an instrument, a form of physical movement that requires real attention. Within weeks, They notice the intrusive thoughts have not disappeared, but have decreased in frequency. The brain has found another loop to run. The fourth step is metabolizing the grief that the obsession is covering. This is the one most people never reach. Because the analyzing, the replaying, the imagined conversations, they are painful, but they are also a form of avoidance. As long as the mind is actively engaged in problem-solving mode, trying to understand, trying to resolve, trying to find the version of events where it makes sense, it does not have to simply feel the loss. The raw, unprocessed grief of having been treated in a way that hurt, of having wanted something that wasn't available, of having stayed longer than you should have because the intermittent warmth kept the circuit alive. That grief is underneath the obsession. And until it is felt, not analyzed, not resolved, just felt, the obsession has a function it cannot be asked to relinquish. The practice is simply to allow the grief its space, not to wallow, not to create suffering, but to stop running from the sadness that the analysis has been keeping at arm's length. When you stop trying to understand and start simply allowing yourself to feel the loss of what was real, and the loss of what you hoped it might become, the obsessive loop often quiets. Because it no longer needs to run. Its function has been fulfilled another way. A real-life example. Someone who has spent months analyzing a relationship finally stops and simply asks, "What am I actually sad about?" Not angry about, not confused about, sad about. The answer comes slowly. I'm sad that the good moments were real and weren't enough. I'm sad that I held on longer than was good for me. I'm sad about what I was hoping for that never came. Sitting with that, just sitting, not fixing, something in the obsessive cycle loosens. Here is the model that holds everything together. Your brain bonded to this person not because they were worthy of the bond, but because intermittent reward created the strongest neurological attachment the brain is capable of forming. The thinking, the replaying, the analyzing, that is not love persisting. That is an incomplete dopamine circuit looking for the resolution it was never given. And the way forward is not to fight the circuit with willpower. It is to complete the loop deliberately through honest writing. To step outside the mechanism by naming it rather than inhabiting it. To give the reward system new material to orient toward. And to let yourself grieve what was real and what wasn't, without the obsession to hide behind. None of this is linear. None of it removes the thoughts immediately. But each of these practices is a message to a brain that has been running an old program. The message is, this loop is closed now. There is nothing left here to resolve. The reason you can't stop thinking about someone who is bad for you is not that you're weak. It's that you're human, with a brain that was designed, long before it ever met this particular person, to hold on to unfinished things. To wait for the resolution that would make the pain make sense. The resolution isn't coming from them. It never was. It was always going to have to come from you, and now you know how to begin. That is enough. That has always been enough.